Dr. Kalibata, Honorable Mukeshimana, you're welcome. So to start us off, there was a strong conversation in the opening plenary. Africa is off track on the Sustainable Development Goals, on the investments in the Malabo Declaration, and we just wanted to give you an opportunity, Honorable Minister, to speak to us about what are the bold actions we can do, what is Rwanda doing, and how can we advance our food systems. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see familiar faces. I think what we are discussing, discussing the food system in the area of crisis, it just provides like a sense of urgency because we have been discussing this for a while. So we keep repeating ourselves that we need to achieve like productivity growth, we need to alleviate post-harvest losses, we need to link farmers to markets. But I think the unique opportunity that we have at hand today is that, as I mentioned, it's getting to the personal level. Everyone is being affected. So my hope is that this conversation can feel like now that all of us, I used to speak to friends from very wealthy countries who were really worried when the lockdowns were happening, that their families are going to die, not necessarily because of COVID, but because of lack of food, which means even the problem that some of the people that are here, people in a wealthy country, wealthy people, they were touched by this crisis in a personal level. So to me, this should be a wake-up call. We shouldn't be feeling sympathetic that, oh, there are vulnerable people, there are hungry people, there are poor people, but now that is really we have seen that can happen to everyone. Why aren't we coming with tangible actions that can accelerate the transformation that we want to get at? To me, that is the most important expectation from this meeting, and I hope we can do it because it's really more than very urgent and more than ever before. To me, that's what I expect.
Thank you, Honorable Mukeshimana. That's a strong message. The crisis affects us all. Dr. Kalibata, you say this often. How can Africa own its food situation? Please speak to us about that. And what are your expectations from the summit? What do you expect from governments, private sectors, and the investments that are needed?
The food crisis that is just happening is basically a reflection of the type of dependencies that we have created in food systems, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We were able as a world to deal with global hunger and food insecurity when we figured out how to move food around. So probably one of the biggest innovations around food was how to move food around. Once we figured out how to produce, the next biggest innovation was how to move food around. That's why your kids think that food comes from the fridge, because they don't live on a farm, the food comes in. But then this whole thing, whether it was COVID-19, which we started with, or whether it is what is happening right now, puts to question that whole idea of how we move food around, but also climate change. That model, will it be able to hold? Can it work in times of crisis? We saw with COVID-19 how supply chains were disrupted. And our biggest worry was, in addition to a health crisis, we're going to have a food crisis that is not related to food, that is related to logistics and how we move things. Same thing with Ukraine and Russia. They have food, but the food is not making it to how we have built the global food system. So what do we need to do differently as a world, as a continent? What do we need to worry about? We look at it from two perspectives from where I'm sitting at AGRA. One, we actually have the ability to produce the food we want. Whether it is wheat, there are 14 countries on this continent that produce wheat. We need 55 million metric tons. We are only able to produce 25 million metric tons. That wheat can be produced mostly because those that are producing wheat are producing 1.2 metric tons per hectare. But you go to some of the countries which are doing irrigation and having good varieties, they're doing 5.4 metric tons per hectare. So that is one of the opportunities for the commodities we produce. How can we increase yield? But increasing yield is not necessarily just seeds and fertilizers. Increasing yield is also access to markets. And until now, we basically have let those markets go. We buy food from everywhere else, right? We don't take the advantage that the continent offers in terms of wheat. So we need to rethink some of this and really think through how we can secure our wheat production, oil seed production, because we can, sunflower and all that, rice production, and soybean production, which is so critical for animal feed. So that's on one hand, increase production, productivity, and ensure that we have enough. The other part, the other way, of course, of looking at it is, do we really need to be eating some of the things? Do we really need to be eating wheat? Of the things that we produce so much. It's just a starch. We produce so much starch in other things. We can't eat many of those things. So there's an opportunity for us also to develop and really go deeper and design and appreciate what we do well. What we do well is cassava. What we do well is potatoes. What we do well in the past used to be millet, but it's possible as well. What we do well is sorghum. So there are a number of things that we do well that we can build on and really build value chains that would also be globally competitive. At least let's start with continental competitivity, right? Because we have a demand. But to be able to do that, we'd have to have a market. So really the biggest opportunity in the room right now is the African Free Continental Trade Area that was launched. Can we go beyond our individual borders? Can we go beyond some of the challenges we live with and actually make that happen? Because if it does happen, everything trickles back down. Farmers will have money. Children will go to school. Jobs will be created. But every time we export the $50 billion that we are using to buy food from somewhere else, we're actually exporting jobs. For me, that is my biggest challenge. Why are we supporting other people to produce and support jobs in those countries when we don't have jobs here? I mean here in Africa, I don't mean here in Rwanda. I mean here in Africa, as a continent, we're exporting $50 billion worth of money to buy food that we can produce, starch that we can produce. So I think for me, those are that's the biggest. But then the opportunity also sits in some of these things we keep doing and we buy in, and how well we do them. And that includes how well we double down on agricultural investments using the CADAP framework that was put in place, and now how well we use the African Free Continent, the CADAP, I mean the food systems. The Food Systems Summit that was launched last year, and our heads of state participated, 49 African countries participated. That does offer a huge opportunity. So this week, to go to the last question you asked, Kathy, this week, our expectations are probably threefold. One, that we really galvanize and energize and challenge ourselves, leaders of the industry, leaders of institutions, leaders, challenge ourselves to think about what we could do differently. That's why this morning we started off with a presentation on the crisis situation on food. How do we re-energize and help people understand? It's not that we don't understand, but how do we really re-energize all ourselves and think about how we can collaborate and coordinate better around this? So that's number one. Because, if we don't, it was said, someone said it, in 2030, Africa will be the only continent that is called poor. Can you imagine that? Do we want to be there? But we will, because we have a huge number of people that live in this sector. that if poverty was dealt with, they could get out of poverty. So that's number one. Number two is this food systems approach. Recognizing that we are now farming at a time of climate change, recognizing that so many people, as the minister was saying, have fallen out of the ability to have access to good food, inclusion, and just being able to understand that these are issues and challenges we have to deal with, and of course recognizing that we are not on track for zero hunger. Many of the African countries are not on track for zero hunger. So if we can adopt this food systems approach, and we have a number of countries this evening, including Rwanda, that will be launching their food system strategies and thinking through the type of investments they want to do. If we can adopt it, and if partners and all the people that we work with can understand that investing in food systems is no longer a luxury we can afford, but a really, really major imperative of where we are going, that would be huge success, both governments and private sector. The last one we talked about, it is about trade. If we can galvanize the energy around how we break those barriers enough to start trading. Africa does only 15% intercontinental trade, where Asia does 77% intercontinental trade. Just think about it. Just think about it. It just doesn't make sense. So if we can really get closer to making these and having these understandings, and of course the last one is climate change, and the fact that in about a month or so we'll be heading to Egypt, COP27, we are calling it the African COP, and our hope is that that we can see more resilience, more adaptation conversations happening, because that's what we care about. We need to strengthen resilience, we need to strengthen adaptation. We are not mitigating, we are actually helping absorb the world's carbon emissions. So our challenge is not that we are releasing carbon, the challenge is that we are suffering from the impacts of these changes, these things that happen in climate change, and we need to see resilience and adaptation invested in, as the world has committed to this, but we don't have those investments happening yet. So if we can build that voice, it's about voice. If we can build that voice, and as we go to COP27, really talk about and demand that resilience, that adaptation happens for smallholder farmers who are dealing with drought every day, with floods every day, that happens and happens the right way, we would have done something great. You have a huge role as media. We are just giving you points, right? So as these things come up, you also have a huge role. As the UN General Assembly is coming up in 2 weeks, COP27 is coming up in two weeks. You also need to stay informed and help build that momentum and energy. So that would be my expectation.
Thank you, Dr. Kalibata. Before I hand over to the media for questions, I want to touch on something you spoke about, that there'll be country pathways presented here. And Honorable Minister, I want to bring that back to you, because Rwanda is one of the countries whose will showcase their country pathways. What's the role of collaboration and inclusivity in translating these pathways to action on ground?
I think everything is all around collaboration, because us as Rwanda, we gather all of these people here because we need help. We do, invest across the food systems, but the challenge has been, how do you, in a big way, scale up the initiatives here and there? How do you get them to be pushed to the level that can transform everything and come up with tangible results? So having all of these people in Kigali, it's civil society, it's private sector, it's other governments. What we look for is, how do we attract more partnership, but how do we get the finance into all of these initiatives that we have identified? As I said, I think some of you, they say that investing in agriculture has, has 3 or 4 times more impact than getting people out of poverty than any other sector. If that is true, then why African countries are not doing it? Because, I mean, traditionally, the issue of, I mean, any country that needs to develop, need to do the food access, the food security on the side. You deal with it, despite that it comes with other millions of economic opportunities, but at least that deal with it, finish it, and then you can move to other things. So I think as we have been saying we have what we are doing in Rwanda. We try to, I mean, the Prime Minister has mentioned so many initiatives that we do. Our struggle since the food system dialogues, we still see a huge push toward the productivity growth. We still have to continue to invest to alleviate post-harvest losses. We don't want any produce food to be lost. And we also need to take back the power of the young people, the power of women, but more importantly, looking at how do we use this food system to get people from one level to the next. It's really ridiculous for us as Africans to be still struggling with the food access issues. Food security should be one thing, and then we move on other things. It would be really sad if by 2030 we are still poor as a continent, and we are poor because we really didn't want to invest into the right sectors. I look at the development trajectory of so many countries that are really on global, who have developed technologies that are on a global scale. And probably, I'd like to say that you will find that Samsung is a global technology company, but it started as a fridge to remove the post-harvest losses. So starting with that, get to all of these funds that you have, to all of these other things. It took a deliberate decision to produce that food. Once it's produced, you don't make it go to waste. And to me, those are really fundamental issues that we should be really continuing to fix as we go. And I'm really convinced that when the food issues are fixed, anything else can be fixed. And there are reports that have been looking at leapfrogging the development using other means, but so far we haven't seen really convincing arguments that it can happen. But now where we are at, I think it's another opportunity to think again and do the right thing. And I hope that that can be really heard and be invested in. I mean, there are a lot of issues, and we like to say money, 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 but when you are a Minister of Agriculture in Rwanda and you are having an audience that doesn't even know what is a hectare is, what is the kilogram is, you feel like, oh, we have a long way to go. But again, there is a time I told one of my colleagues, and I'm like, okay, if I had that power, I would do two things. I'll invest in agriculture and I'll invest in education so that we don't get even the people that we say, oh, 50 kilogram of NPK per hectare, but these people, they don't know what it is. So having an audience of that level calls us as African countries to invest into educating our people in different areas, because you have what the farmer needs, you have the lower cadre of people who can help the people, you have even the high-end people who can know what is the RNA and how it can be harnessed to generate technologies that can move the development forward. So I think those two, I cannot emphasize enough how those two are important. People need to eat. And sometimes you feel like probably if we, I think I have told you, many of you, that probably if we focus on food rather than agriculture, all of you will feel included. But once we started speaking of agriculture, probably people will say, oh, those are the poor farmers down there. But once we say it's bread, and Ukraine and Russia are preventing us to have bread, then we can talk. Then everyone get mobilized. It's really, I like this thing of food system, because it takes agriculture on the side and bring something at the center that everyone cares about. I think having poor people farming in Africa it's one of the things that is pulling us back, because, I mean, I like it when you go to the field and then you find that these farmers are like, okay, we want to increase the productivity, we want to increase the production, and then you go to the finance people, they're like, oh, we have a lot of, I mean, GDP is now growing, your agriculture sector, you are causing inflation, and then other leaders are like, okay, we need wealthy nation, we need wealthy people, but it stays there. It stays there, and it's probably people are thinking that GDP will come by itself. The food inflation will stop by itself. It takes deliberate knowledge of what is this thing, is it important for me? Otherwise, if you ask the GDP growth, you ask the food inflation reduction, but you don't feel like, okay, I need to design policies that are getting money into the pockets of the farmers so that they can be able to produce food that is going to reduce the prices, then I don't have inflation. You feel like, are we really together? So to me, you guys in the media, that is the message for you. GDP doesn't come by itself. Inflation doesn't stop by itself. And no one eats GDP, no one eats money, people eat food. So it's really important that we get there. And once we say food, all of us feel like, okay, we are in. But I know, Emmanuel, you write to reports about the farmers and everything, but I think you guys will have spoken about the vulnerable farmers millions of times, but let's include ourselves so that we can feel like it's really important. To me, that has been an observation that I don't feel like these people, they know what they're speaking about. Because you mustn't well be throwing the numbers on GDP growth. GDP doesn't generate itself. GDP is generated by investment and economic growth. So please take that message and help us to tell these people there's no such thing as GDP, there's no such thing as inflation if there is no investment into the producers of those numbers. It's not me who produce numbers. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. That's a very strong message around ownership of the problem at all levels, or the opportunity at all levels, but being very deliberate. I think I'll take it to the floor. Please state your name, the media house, and who you're directing the question to. I see 6 questions. We'll start with you at the back.
We're talking about food, and we're talking about how to get food, but how much food does Africa need? Then on the countries that are on track to zero hunger, how many are they? How many are still lagging behind? And how many countries actually went back as a result of global shocks, Ukraine, COVID? If you could give us more details about those. Thank you so much.
So thank you for your question. How much food do we need? That's a tall order in terms of numbers, but let me just give you an example. Just call out 2 things. In maize, we are largely self-sufficient, and when I say self-sufficient, it's as a continent. So in Southern Africa, we are producing much more maize than we need. So you find that most of the times in Southern Africa, they are living with crushing prices. In Eastern Africa, we have some exposure. We produce maize, but we do have some exposure, a certain amount of exposure. In Western Africa, in some places, we produce maize, but really probably not the biggest maize producing area. So if you looked at it from that perspective, as a continent, we are okay on maize. The reason we are definitely having hunger pockets in different places, and maize will be one of them, is can we move it around sufficiently enough to be able to ensure that we can feed each other? No, we can't for now. We are not able to do that. We do that regionally. We are seeing increasing trade between Eastern and Southern Africa. And that is helping a bit, but we could do so much more because, like I said, Southern Africa has great production systems for maize. In wheat, as a continent, we need about 55 million metric tons. We are only able to produce 25 million metric tons. 20 of those metric tons, 20 of those million metric tons, between 15 and 20 million metric tons is consumed in the north, mostly between Egypt, Sudan, and a few other countries. The rest of Africa, it's about that 5 million metric tons. So that's why I was saying the opportunity sits in some of the other things we are producing. So I can't go through all the things, because, but the easiest number to talk about, we are importing $50 billion worth of food we can produce. And let me give you a sense of how this is important. In 2008, when we had a food crisis, the number was 15 billion. Today it is about 55 billion. It is estimated that by 2030 it will be 110 billion. So you do understand, when I talk about job exports, you do a back of the envelope calculation. If a job costs about $300, how many jobs are we exporting? Creating a job costs about $300. A job that would earn, those are MasterCard numbers, MasterCard Foundation numbers. A job that would earn about 60,000 Rwandan francs, right? No, 60,000, I don't know which 60,000, would take about $300 to create, to get off the ground. So if you did that, how many jobs are we exporting? So Musoni, you do the numbers there. You're younger than me. Countries on track to zero hunger. In the last biannual review, and this is really good because we do have a continental mechanism that keeps track of how things happen. I'm happy that Rwanda has consistently shown up well as the country that is leading on a number of things. So to be number one on that platform, you have to do a whole lot of things. So Rwanda has shown up well. But in terms of food security, only one country, zero hunger, only one country showed up. It was Kenya, interestingly. The country that was said to be on track on food security. I'm saying interestingly because Kenya now has a whole number of people, close to 4 or 5 million people that are hungry in the north as a result of climate change. Maybe also part of what they look at is some of the processes that are taking a country towards food security and whether the country would be able to make those numbers by 2030. So based on where Rwanda is at, based on where Kenya is at, and based on some of the other improvements we are seeing, it's possible to get there, but not at business as usual scenario. We would have to change how we are investing in the sector. There's nothing different here. Kenya is showing up right because part of the big four of the last government was one of the four was food security. So like the minister is saying, they doubled down on investments in food security. Rwanda is showing up well because in many places, Rwanda actually did make deliberate efforts to invest in food security. Right? So the question really becomes how much we sustain those efforts. For a country to use food and agricultural systems to move out of food security, we need a constant investment of 10 to 15%. And Muson, I need you to get these numbers. for a country to move out of food insecurity and poverty, we need to invest 10 to 15% of our GDPs. I'm assuming that the country has good GDP. 10 to 15% of our GDPs at least for 15 years. That's what the data shows. There's a whole lot of data. That consistency is what makes a difference. That consistency. Remember how we in Rwanda we talk about how many people have got out of poverty, or how many people are moving. When people get out of poverty, many times they move also out of the sector. That's a good thing. They go to other parts of the sector. So that will deal with the challenge of poverty and food security.
Thank you, Dr. Kalibata. Minister?
Probably what I want to add, the zero hunger doesn't mean self-sufficiency in carbohydrates. As the countries move from one level to the next, more nutritious foods are needed. So you will see that we need more fibers, we need more proteins, we need more eggs, we need more nutritious foods. So we won't be able to reach zero hunger if we are just eating maize as it is in certain parts of Africa. We wouldn't reach zero hunger if we are just eating the wheat. So it is really important that we understand it for the quality of life of our citizens. We need to get to the table nutritious foods. So that is another dimension that sometimes when we discuss this thing in a Africa continental level, we don't really highlight because we are really struggling with the quantity. And as we haven't been able to achieve the quantity, we forget that there is a quality that we need to take along with the quantity. So to me, I mean, again, during COVID, with the NCDP, we conducted a study because, guys, there was all the time crisis of eggs and everything. Then we decided to, as government, to buy eggs and distribute them in the families having babies. And then Dr. Anita conducted a study, and then she found that more of the people, families, mothers in Rwanda, they have a knowledge of what is the right nutrition for their kids, but they don't do it. So what it tells you is we still have a challenge. We still have to tell people, you guys, it's not the fact of you knowing, it's a fact of you to implement it and they get nutritious food into the mouth of your baby for the baby to have a potential growth. So again, I mean, we say we are off track, but even if we go beyond the African continent, I have read recently that India is reaching zero hunger. I mean, we all know the chaos and everything, but I mean, having people who know what it is and how to do it and willing to do it is a big difference. Because, as I said, the education, I mean, look at who is leading the world today is Indians, because they have educated their people, they have so many remittances going back, and then, I mean, you can see that if they say India has reached the zero hunger, I mean, there are so many things that are into play that are not necessarily one of the things. That's why actually things get complex, because the leadership is dealing with millions of things and getting every single thing right to get the boost that we need to reach a different level. That's a challenge, and I guess that's why all of these gatherings become important, so that people can have type of division of labor, so that all of us, we can put together our efforts and come up with something that is feasible. Otherwise, I mean, we may say there is sufficient food, but I guess some of you, or majority of you, you know that infrastructure to move food from one area to the next is the biggest challenge of the Africa continental trade issue. So that brings another dimension that if that is not solved, it's not going to work. I can tell you, I see Emmanuel writing so much about how much the exporters cry that the air cargo is overcosting, that they cannot be doing business. That's one indication. And there, I mean, on the lifting food from one country to the next, it's not the air transport that is needed. Probably that's 1% of what is needed, and there 99% is on a road, is on an ocean. And I mean, there's a significant investment that is indeed needed into that area for us to say, oh, as a continent, as a whole, we can achieve the self-sufficiency of food.
Thank you so much, Minister. I've been given a 5-minute hard stop, so I'll give a chance for one question each, one to Dr. Kalibata, one to Minister, and then we close the session. I'm going with gender because we had a man, so I'll give the lady first.
Thank you so much. My name is Denise Mbabazi Mambara. I work for Radio TV 10 Rwanda. If you allow, I would like to ask my question in Kinyarwanda and get the answer. Nifuzaga kubaza hakorwa iki ngo abahinzi bahinge umusaruro mwinshi, haboneka umusaruro mwinshi ariko nanone mwiza ushobora guhaza abaturage ba Afrika bakomeza kwiyongera umunsi ku munsi, ariko noneho by'umwihariko u Rwanda.
Ibyo ngibyo ni gahunda ya leta, ngira ngo igikenewe ni ukongera investment cyangwa amafaranga ajyamo kugira ngo abantu babone inyongeramusaruro zihagije, babone ubumenyi bubafasha gukora ibiri correct, kubera yuko ushobora no kuba wabonye ifumbire cyangwa wabonye imbuto ariko ntubikoreshe neza uko byakagombye gukora kugira ngo bitange umusaruro. Bisaba kongera imari mu kongera ibijyanye no kuhira imyaka, gukoresha tekinoloji, gufasha muri izi gahunda ubona dushyiramo imari zo gutunganya umusaruro, kwanika, transport. Ubundi tunabona yuko transport ubundi ni ikintu cyakagombye kuba kinagaruka muri leta kubera yuko ni business opportunity, ariko ntabwo bavuga ngo ni kimwe, haba hakenewe ibintu byinshi cyane. Ngira ngo iyo ugiye muri gahunda ya leta y'ubuhinzi cyangwa se n'iy'inganda ubona yuko haba harimo ibyo bintu byose. Nkuko nabivuze, ntago ari ikintu kimwe bavuga ngo oh, nashoye imari mu ifumbire ibibazo birakemutse. Ntabwo bikemutse. Niyo mpamvu tureba ibi bintu muri food system perspective, kubera yuko nukemura ikibazo cyo kongera umusaruro, ntukemure icyo kujyana ku isoko, ntacyo wafashije, kuko uwo muntu wanahinze nimba atabonye isoko ryiza ngo abashe kubona amafaranga yo kongera gushora, azahagarara. Ni ibintu byinshi cyane rero, ariko biba biri muri gahunda zitandukanye kugira ngo abantu babashe kubigezaho, ariko kugira ngo abahinzi bakora ibyo bagomba gukora no kureba nko mu gihugu cyacu ukareba uti ubutaka dufite bungana bute. Niyo mpamvu haba ziriya gahunda zo guhuza ubutaka byibuza kugira ngo ubutaka making economic sense, kuko uko buba bungana ntabwo ntekereza yuko umuntu yahinga ngo arye narangiza natwe tugaburire. Haba hari gahunda nyinshi zituma ibyo bintu bibasha kugera ku bandi, ariko ntago ari ikintu kimwe nakubwira ngo hakorwa iki ngo ibibazo birakemutse. Hanyuma kuri Kigali Group turabazi, endorsement barayifite, actually bafite MOU na national the NCDP kugira ngo babashe kujya bagaburira imigati yabo mu bana b'amashuri n'ibindi, ariko ntutekereze yuko ari company yageze yijya, iracyiyubaka, turayiza, ariko turahazi, dukorana nabo ku munsi. Ntabwo niba kubwira ngo bageze aho bajya, igisigaye nuko babona endorsement barayifite millions of times. You have heard me many times tuvuga ngo twaranabigishije tubigisha gukoresha iriya fu y'ibijumba, tubigisha gukoresha kasava kugira ngo bagabanye ifu y'ingano ikenerwa, ariko ni kampani y'urubyiruko ikiyubaka, irakiyubaka rero yiha umwanya yiyubake, then we see. Ariko nanone urebye ku bijyanye na gukura ibiryo from one area to the next, ni ikibazo dufite, kandi urebye muri Afurika njya mbibona mubivuga yuko turi bamwe mu bihugu bifite imihanda myiza given even the size, ariko again it takes a deliberate effort yo kuinvestinga muri tracking kuva muri regio imwe ijya ahandi. Again nshobora kukubwira nti when you speak to the private sector people, bisaba commitment na ownership at all levels. Ushobora kuvuga uti okay, hari inyanya nyinshi muri Kirehe, dukeneye yuko probably twubaka cold room ku isoko rya Kimironko kugira ngo umuntu bari abadamu bazicuruza bajye bakuramo izo bakeneye n'izisigaye bazisubize mu ahantu hakonjesha. Ukavuga uti reka investing, umuntu azakubwira ngo by the way nta mihanda iva Kirehe igera ku Kimironko, by the way cost of electricity is too high, therefore I cannot invest into that. So bisaba yuko abantu bareba bakareba bati there is a business opportunity, ariko again that business opportunity abantu bayifata bate. Bisaba yuko tugumya gukora, nta kintu na kimwe kitari important, buri kintu cyose kiri important. Ushobora kuvuga ngo nta kibazo cy'amashanyarazi dufite, amashanyarazi is going to waste, ariko as long as it's costing 15 cents per kilowatt hour, while it can make 0.07 cents. It makes a huge difference. So what I come up with is like there is significant investment that is needed kugira ngo ibibazo dufite bive from one area to the other, and it requires the mindset change kugira ngo twumve yuko it's important, but also we need to do it, and how we do it efficiently, it's really needed. Otherwise, if we don't change, I wish we change, we don't get to the 2030 being poor. I will be still alive, and I don't want to be there.